Hello, and welcome to another episode of Financial Clarity Live. Today, we're going to be discussing expense forecasting. I want to start by thanking everyone on LinkedIn for joining us, and my guest, Phil Maffey, CFO at Sustain CFO, and Augie Manzella, our esteemed financial analyst at Sustain CFO. Welcome, guys. I'm Josh Notes. I'm going to be your host, and today we are here at Financial Clarity Live, and we're here to transform the way that you think about your business finances. This isn't just a numbers game. It's about clarity. It's about strategy. And it's about taking control. So over the next 25, 30 minutes, we're going to demystify the financial planning process, show you why FP&A matters and how it can unlock your business's true potential. Together, we're going to cut through the noise. We're going to focus on what matters, and we're going to arm you with the tools to make you smarter and help make your decisions even sharper. So with that being said, let's dive in. All right, guys, expense forecasting. I think I've noticed this is where most entrepreneurs, business owners go when things get tough. They're like, okay, what can we cut? So kind of titled it this way: what to keep, cut, and continue for sustainable growth. I guess let's just start with Augie. We've asked Phil a lot of questions in these. How do you see the expense forecasting and specifically the trimming of the budgets occur? And what do you think third party is the best way to approach this?
Well, from my perspective, you see, when you roll out the initial forecast, then you give people a more grounded view at what the numbers look like for the coming months. A lot of times they'll start looking for maybe software packages that aren't highly utilized or part-time employees, all looking for a place to cut some sort of expenses and bring a little stability back into the cash flow.
Like it, right? So I think what I'm hearing is, well, yeah, you can cut, and like, why don't you start with the things that you should have cut sooner that you aren't actually using, right? Or think creatively about how to trim, just depending on what's going on. But that's maybe jumping ahead of ourselves. So let's start with understanding expense forecasting. Phil, you're our expert in this case. Can you help us understand how to think about fixed versus variable expenses and how that fits into this forecasting model?
Yeah, so the simplest form, your variable expenses, right, oftentimes should be reflected in your cost of goods sold. And those are going to be the costs that shift in particular as your revenue shifts, right? So, that's one sort of variable expense, right? The most common ones we're going to look at in the P&L and keep separate for that reason, right? You're going to forecast stuff that moves in lockstep with revenue differently from fixed expenses. So, perfect example of that is somebody on an annual salary. Their monthly salary that gets getting paid month in, month out, regardless of how well the business is doing from a bottom line perspective. So understanding which ones are changing versus which ones stay fixed is important because each needs its own unique treatment when it comes to forecasting.
Okay, that makes sense. And when we're thinking about financial control, this is not something you want to be just putting in place because there's a challenge in the business. This is something that should be put in place all the time. Best practice is to make sure that money is not being spent unless the ownership and leadership group has determined it drives the business towards their ultimate goal. But I guess, Augie, what tools or techniques do you see being put in place to strengthen financial control, maybe outside of crisis moments?
I've mentioned before, Giraffe is a very powerful tool. Basic things like QuickBooks, Salesforce, and getting them to all play nice together. That really helps give you an up-to-date snapshot of any aspect of your business financially at that point in time.
Right. You can only manage what you're measuring, and you can only, measure what you're actually keeping an eye on. So that's a good point. So as we look at the roles in expense management, you guys are highlighted on the screen. Obviously, some organizations small enough that the CEO is having to get involved and play roles here themselves. But, Phil, what do you think the primary role, let's call a business, let's just say it's $10 million in revenue. It's a boutique real estate business, what role is their fractional CFO? Should they be playing in the expense management process?
Yeah, so the first thing that we're always going to do, the first place we start is making sure that we're doing the accounting and tracking the information in a way that allows us to glean insight from that data, right? So we'll do things like review charts of accounts and review billings and the way AP is organized and paid and things like that to understand the flow of the data, right? Ultimately, which leads us to the flow of the cash, which will then set us up to be in a position to know where to look for the information we need to build our forecasting process, right? Regardless of the size of the business. And the particular example that you gave, real estate world, right? We're usually talking about bigger chunks of cash versus maybe some businesses we used to work with, right? Where, they made, $15, $20 million a year, $3,000, $4,000 at a time. So, those kinds of businesses are going to be very different because the cash flow is different. But ultimately, it's all around, organizing the data and, setting up the systems to capture information, catch issues, and, put you in a position to manage costs and ultimately manage cash flow.
And Augie, how do you track spending patterns to identify potential cost saving opportunities within expense management?
Well, once a client is onboarded, all that becomes a giant, it pops up very clearly using our different back-end software. It's not really as much of finding a needle in a haystack as it is, a pretty glaring red flag. So just in the weekly process of updating and making sure everything's running, those kind of things identify themselves.
Okay, awesome. So we got the roles down. We know who the people are, similar as other conversations, but just a little bit more focused on the spend side. So we talked about this last episode in the revenue side of things. The challenges are kind of similar, but they're like looking in a mirror. So one being underestimating cost. Phil, what do you think is the root cause of why folks tend to underestimate costs?
Right on. Yeah. So, of whether, if you're asking me which I'd prefer to forecast the cost versus the revenue, because the cost is a lot easier, but there's still, challenges that arise. Underestimating cost is usually, at least what I've seen on the sales and marketing side, right? If you want to generate a bunch of top line, you're going to need to make sure that you invest in the business, right? So it's not always about just trimming costs, but it's ultimately allocating funds to the places where they're most effective. And people oftentimes underestimate the cost it's going to incur to drive the levels of revenue they're looking for, right? We see this all the time where it's you go to the sales guy and you want them to deliver 10%, 20% growth year over year. They're going to come back and ask for a budget to support that with additional marketing efforts or more team members or whatever it's going to take to be able to achieve those goals. So that can, if not monitored quickly, we use this term empire building, right, where the team's out there spending a bunch of money to try to support what they think is the ultimate direction of the company. And then, when the dust settles, that wound up being a lot more costly than perhaps, the owner of the business was initially expecting it to be without proper control.
Yeah. And I think, boiling this back down to root issues, I think we've seen this a lot where, especially if you outsource the bookkeeping, maybe before we get involved, it hasn't been a high priority. Things are just kind of being thrown in whatever bucket they are. And then, some analysis is done, some information is provided at a first run, but it wasn't in the right place. And so they are making decisions, big assumptions based off of, what a spend was, but in some other bucket that they're not looking at, there's other pieces of the spend. And so that's another way that costs are underestimated or inaccurately predicted. What about, Augie, on the misallocating resources? And now we're not talking fraud here. Obviously, we can get to that in a whole nother section, but just kind of spending things on the wrong things. Whose responsibility is that, and how does that come up on a monthly basis?
Well, I like to stay in pretty close communication with the in-house teams of the different clients and collaborate with them to make sure, first and foremost, that it's not an oversight and that someone's aware that this spend is sitting in the wrong bucket or possibly is a duplicate of something that hasn't been used in a long time. And once everyone is aware, then the team can make solid decisions about where to reallocate those funds.
Okay. All right, I got a quick story from the field on the last one, unexpected surges. So, it's been very cold here in the mid-Atlantic of the U.S. And I think, as some folks out there know, I'm in the energy and power business as well. And the price of power, I looked at it earlier this morning, went from what's normally about $60 to $100 a megawatt hour, well over $1,000. So we're talking 10x in the course of an hour of a price surge. Obviously, we've got some industrial clients. We advise them on what to do and how to prepare for that. And most of them are critical infrastructure, so they need to keep the power on no matter what. But, maybe something a little bit less drastic of a price surge or an unexpected surge. Phil, how do you help clients to prepare for these unexpected surges?
Right. How do you prepare for the unexpected? But we've all lived through it over the last couple of years, where the cost of goods goes up, and we know that that's a continuing trend, right? So a lot of the times, very simplistically, what we'll do is, when we're building budgets from one year to the next, we'll bake in what's called in the industry a COLA, or a cost of living adjustment, or just an annual inflationary increase. So that way we're not kidding ourselves thinking that we're going to be spending the same dollar for whatever it is today that we are 2-3 years from now, right? Even though we don't know where it's going to come from, we know that inflation exists, it's a thing. And so our sanity check is, if we think that there's not going to be any increases, and especially when it comes to materials and things like that, we're probably fooling ourselves. We got to bake in some level of not being able to point to the widget by widget, but some bucket of, there's going to be an extra 10% increase in our cost base. And, the example you gave was an extreme one, but there's plenty of industries out there where you need to be building in these contingencies, so that in the event where these things do happen, you don't get upside down in your supply chain, and then things are now more costly and you can't get your hands on them, and you're going to be in a tight spot real quick.
Yeah, as our client in the energy space who does the advising said to me this morning, it's not the swings and the averages that'll kill you, it's the standard deviations. So I think if you are running your business on power and you don't have an outlook for the future, I encourage you to hire somebody to get one, because the price is going up. But we'll leave that for another session. So let's talk about actionable tips and strategies that can be used here. So, Augie, looking at you for the use of tools, technology, like how does this work for somebody who's busy? Let's say they're, again, real estate focused, they're out in their truck, they're only looking at the numbers 1 or 2 times a month. What should they be looking at, and what tools should they be using to manage their expenses?
One of the systems that we use when it comes to client-facing information, that is, it is most effective and streamlined and easy for someone who might not be familiar with the platform to navigate and find everything they need, is Giraffe. It creates a very reliable platform for collaborating with different clients on their schedule. It's got notation features. It's very sort of intuitive to just maneuver around the platform, and that's been probably the biggest leverage of our stack.
Okay, and Phil, let's talk to somebody who hasn't quite got to that status yet. They can't, or they don't believe, or they haven't chosen to invest in a team like ours. They're just using Excel. We've done that. We've run businesses that way. What do you recommend that they do? Maybe, regarding getting a template and working off of it to just at least do something when it comes to expense management.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of use the term spreadsheet, but if you're in business, you've got a ledger, whether you use QuickBooks or whatever it may be. You got a bank account or something that's showing you the money you're spending, right? So looking at what's happening in whatever form you can is the most important thing. And then kind of goes to what we always talk about and hammer home during our onboarding, is organizing the information and the data in a way that it's robust enough to tell the story you want it to tell. So, whether we're going to have a spreadsheet or something more sophisticated, the first place we always start is making sure that the information is organized in a way that makes sense, right? You alluded to earlier, it's like, if you've got stuff that's not properly classified, and then you're using that to make information, you're starting with a faulty foundation. So that's the real primary place to start is, look at your credit card statements, look at your bank statements, put all information on a piece of paper, trend it out over time, figure out what you're paying for month in and month out, right? What are the one-time, one-off expenses, and understand, what that monthly burn is, right? It's a key step we're always talking about with our clients. How much cash is it taking from the business every month? They'll tell you how much money you make to, operate in a profitable fashion. And, kind of starting from there with the real basics gives you a framework within which to work.
Yeah. And I mean, look, this is not, this is what gets us up in the morning, but not necessarily every business owner out there. Matter of fact, based on the conversations I've had, I'd say 8 out of 10 of them hate their financials. They hate dealing with it. They do not like looking at it. And you know what? That is okay. You do not have to love this stuff. That's where we come in. If you hire a team, you delegate correctly, you keep your team accountable, keep the vision moving forward. That's your job. And then a team like us can basically provide this infrastructure so that you only have to deal with it, 1 or 2 times a month. And what we've heard in our, just by the end of the 90 days, what we're hearing in our onboarding summit calls is this relief. It's like, oh, I've been waiting for today. I've been waiting to feel like I actually am an executive. I come in, my reports are there in my inbox. I read them in advance. I ask my questions. I get my team engaged in it. They make the decisions. And then if it doesn't work, I'm responsible for making the tough decisions. And that's what this can look like if the team is built and the tools are in place. So impacts of expense forecasting, obviously at the top, profitability is something that every business likely is aiming for. The other piece of this, I think, which is really important, especially when things get wobbly, is financial stability, right? Is okay, seasonality is kicking in, price of this is going up. We can add some stability by just knowing this stuff 30, 60 days in advance, making some adjustments. But I think the point of, why most folks are in business is to sustain that business and grow it and find some level of scale, whatever their vision is. And that's what we support here. We're not a plant CFO in a suit that's sent in by the money to come and babysit, their money. We're here to represent the entrepreneur, the business owner, the lifeblood of business. But, Phil, what have you seen as far as impact that can occur? Maybe give a specific example from doing the expense forecasting, and then immediately, how does that turn around and create some growth or scalability in the model?
Yeah, I was talking with a client this morning who, one of ours who operates a more complex operation and, multiple entities that we use, our tools that Augie's alluded to earlier to pull all that information into one place. And then we started just, the last couple of months running through a monthly results review. And, he alluded to the fact that, kind of to the point today, was like, do you want to keep doing this or do you want us to be an AC? And he's like, no, we need to keep doing this. It's kind of forcing me to look at the real picture and organizing the information in a way where I can look at it holistically, where otherwise it's kind of this job over here, that job over there, a bunch of people, across a bunch of different entities, and no real sense of what the sum total of everything that was going on was, and kind of organizing his controllership team around being more efficient at the book close. Oftentimes when we come in, it happens just kind of de facto, where there's just a level of ownership that gets added to someone who knows what they're doing is watching what they're doing and expecting to close the book. We can have these kinds of reviews. But yeah, for him to understand where he stands, right, what his decisions he's taken across the multiple enterprises, and to be able to view that all in one place is a powerful tool for him to kind of realize what targets need to be in order to sustain himself. And a lot of things come to light as a result of just organizing the information in a way that it tells the full story and shows the whole picture, and not just kind of trying to consume it in a bunch of different pieces that don't add to the total.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been there before as a business owner that did not have financial clarity. I can attest to how lonely that feels, and how my business partners asking about that when I didn't have a system in place felt like an attack, even though that wasn't their intention. So that's what we're talking about here, is affecting with yourself, with the numbers in front of you, and a honest look in the mirror. And when you look at that, we're talking about the business here. you see things that you don't like, if you were just in the room by yourself, it would be easy to kind of find a distraction, pick up your phone, think about something that's happening positive in sales that might lead to something positive down the road. But when you have a team around you holding you accountable, it's like, hey, let's not move past that yet, because it doesn't seem like we have resolution. It sounds like cost is getting out of control on this item, or this supply chain is starting to slip. Who's our next provider? Are we sure we can get that at the same price? These are the conversations that happen. They are, highly impactful. They don't feel necessarily urgent until they actually occur, and then they can change literally how the business model functions overnight. So we'll keep talking about this today, and we're going to keep hammering on it throughout, because it's ultimately a tough conversation that needs to happen. So controlling costs and aligning spending. This is kind of how you do it. It's a 1, 2, 3, right? Set clear goals. You want to make sure that everybody knows that they're on the same page. They understand what they are being asked to do, and then we can see whether or not they are actually doing that. Identify cost-saving measures. Analysts like Augie come in and are really able to kind of take that third-party view, ask those pointed questions. Are we sure we need to have that in order for this business model to continue to function? Those type of conversations and cost-saving measures, they do add up, especially if you're running quick. You've got a lot of folks with spending capabilities. Those things can really ratchet up. And then the last part is prioritizing investment. And I don't think we're talking about necessarily buying another business, although we do operate in the M&A space, and we can help businesses with acquiring others or selling themselves or raising capital if that's what they need. But what we're talking about here is prioritizing spend that is an investment in the business. Marketing is, sales is, R&D is. These are things that end up creating growth downstream. So that being said, I want us to kind of bring us in for a finish today, thinking about the unknowns. Phil, you're great. You have some philosophical takes on how to approach this. I got a couple bullets here for you, but predicting and preparing for fluctuations, you're going to say it over and over again: scenario analysis, and having that scenario planning. Here's a 1, 2, 3, 4 step, but maybe boil it down for us one more time and just help folks think about how they're going to actually do this. Pretend they only have a spreadsheet. They don't have us as team members. How are they going to do this starting this month?
Yeah, I mean, it's one spreadsheet. You start it with the cash you have to operate your business, credit, whatever it may be. You're going to then lay out all the things you need to run your business, and you're going to lay out all the assumptions you've got, and you're going to come up with a number in terms of what your profitability looks like, right? But you're going to start with the expenses, because that's going to tell you how much revenue you need to earn before you have a profitable business, right? So really all comes down to drawing a line in the sand with the best information you have available, and then hedge that up by 20% because you're probably underestimating. And then kind of backing into, right, how long can I operate with the amount of cash I have in the environment? And answering those kind of questions, we work with startups and funded startups all the time. That's their primary function in the world, is to get to the goal known before they burn through all the cash that they've raised. So figuring out what that burn rate looks like and what that is juxtaposed to your cash is everything, especially for a business that's just starting out and doesn't have a bunch of data from a historical perspective they can use to leverage your forecast, right? You're ultimately gonna have to take a leap of faith and make some assumptions, but that can be done in a way where you're coming into it eyes wide open, and that ultimately is the name of the game.
Thank you for keeping it simple. All right, we got a couple questions from the audience. Thank you, those out there listening and writing in with your questions. Got Emily, who's an owner of Greenfields Landscaping. Obviously, there's some seasonality depending on where she's located. She wants to know, how can I ensure my expense forecast account for seasonal spikes in cost? How can I ensure my expense forecasts for the seasonal spikes in cost? Augie, what do you have to say to that? You've looked at a lot of seasonal businesses.
First step is identify. And you might have some sort of idea where a general sense of seasonality exists, but you want to really crunch the data, find out on a more granular level And once they're identified, you can make decisions based on the short term, the midterm, longer term, as to, are we allocating in a responsible manner?
Yeah, I love that. And with, we're talking about seasonal business. In this case, seasonal means weather, weather means climate, climate is changing. What we're talking about here is like, do you stop cutting the grass because it's November, or do you stop cutting the grass because the average daily temperature dropped beneath 44 degrees? I even got a thumbs up on that one. So like, that's the type of data that you could then pull up, and next October, you've got it in your forecast, and you're looking at, a little bit more than the phone forecast that you've got, the one that tells you 3-4 weeks out. And hey, we can keep the crews running for an extra 3 weeks and keep cutting grass because that's what it says in our contract. So these are just examples of getting to the root of the information. Well, key takeaways is and next steps. So obviously starting somewhere with expense forecasting is better than closing your eyes and hoping it all works out. We've talked about the variable versus fixed component to this. We've talked about how to deal with seasonality. We've talked about, not just doing broad-based cuts, but really looking for why and how things are driving the business forward. I guess, Phil, I'm going to give you the final word. If somebody has one takeaway from today about expense forecasting, what should it be?
I used to work with a wiser man than myself who always said, expense walks on 2 legs. So if you're not holding folks accountable, that the expenses are going to start to run away from you. So, unless you're the only one in the business who is looking at a checkbook every single time a decision's made to spend money, making sure that accountability is there and everyone understands what the overall objectives are is super important.
And with that, I want to thank you out there, the listeners on LinkedIn, for participating. I want to thank my guests, Phil Maffei and Augie Manzella. I want to encourage anyone out there who's enjoying these insights to get them every single week by joining our newsletter, Finance in 5, for weekly tips, updates, and Q&A from the episode. I encourage you to join us next week on 3 p.m. on Wednesday for Financial Clarity Live, where we're going to be jumping into the CFO's role in setting the forecast. So with that being said, thank you very much and have a great day.